Hey Maximizers, this is Maximus call-in radio show number 14. We had a great show today with a lot of questions about ideal exercise routines. We talked about sleep supplementation in terms of magnesium and melatonin. We talked about a lot of behavioral sleep optimization techniques to increase your sleep quality and quantity. What to do if you're having sleeping issues, including potentially insomnia. And we talked, finally, a fun question about how do you overcome being a nice guy and better strategies in terms of improving your dating life. So tune in, have a great show ahead of you. User from Instagram, Naza, asked a question about what workout split do you do? So I was talking about how I do actually a 5-day full body workout. So it's technically not a split. I actually try to hit all major muscle groups basically in every single day. And the reason for that is if you actually read the research on hypertrophy or muscle building, the biggest determinant of that is volume. So which is basically like the amount of exercise that you're doing. And there's a bunch of research. We don't know exactly the optimal number of sets, but it's much higher than most people do, right? Because if you're working out a typical bro split, so to speak, of 3 days a week, and you're doing 3 sets of 10, which is very typical, right? So you're only hitting maybe 3 sets of a particular muscle group per week, especially if you're doing that in isolation versus kind of like a compound lift. Versus if you're hitting it every single day and you're doing 3 sets of it for 5 days a week, now you're doing 15 sets versus 3 sets. And we know very clearly that people who do 15 sets, maybe even up to 20, 25 sets per week, that's the increased volume that results in greater hypertrophy or muscle gain. The only thing that is a caveat to that is I do try to provide variation from day to day. So I'm not doing the same exact, for instance, chest exercise every single day. You might want to do an incline bench, a regular bench, a decline bench, some butterfly curls, some difficult push-up variation, and that's your 5 days a week of chest training. But basically Monday through Friday, you're doing a slightly different chest exercise. And if you can't do a totally different exercise, you can just do slight variations of it. So for instance, if you only have a pull-up bar, and that's your kind of pull motion, and you're kind of using that to work both your biceps and your back, you might want to do pull-ups, you might want to do chin-ups, you want to do narrow grip, you can do wide grip, and you can hold, if you have the opportunity to hold the handle in parallel, that's five different pull-up variations essentially that you can do. So that's a very effective technique. So I just try to do that. I lift weights basically, or do body weight strength training 5 days a week. And then once a week, I'll try to do some sort of interval exercise like basketball, some light sprints, or something else that just adds a little bit of cardio as well. So that's my current routine. It actually works really well. And I try to be pretty efficient about it. So including warm up, I'm not working out for more than 30 to 45 minutes. I like to kind of get in and out, do hard work, get it done, and move on with the rest of my life. Yeah, why don't we do a sleep question?
Cool. So question we have from Discord is actually from our squad too. What is a better supplement for sleep, magnesium or melatonin? Any other suggestions?
Yeah, great question about what's an optimal supplement for sleep. So I'm going to give you the super long answer to this question, which is going to be kind of my whole famous sleep optimization thread that I've shared on Twitter. As a clinician, you have to have a good diagnosis or case conceptualization in order to come up with a personalized treatment recommendation, right? So you have to understand why you're not sleeping well and why you need to take a supplement in the first place. So the reality is if you have, good sleep, you don't need any sort of sleep supplement, quite frankly. It's usually people take supplements in order to address some sort of issue or deficit that they're having with their sleep. Now, the question is, like I said, why are you not sleeping well? So for instance, if the major driver of your insomnia or sleep difficulties are stress or anxiety, you would probably come up actually with a different intervention or treatment than if someone's reason is because of jet lag or they're trying to sleep at a different time. That's more of a circadian rhythm issue than it is an anxiety or stress issue. So if it's more stress or anxiety related, then I think it may be useful to do a combination of behavioral and potentially supplemental things in consultation with your doctor. So the first thing that I always emphasize, and people really, really underappreciate the association between walking and physical activity and sleep. A lot of the reason that a lot of people are actually having sleep difficulties these days, specifically due to quarantine, I've said it before and it's worth saying again, is they're incredibly sedentary right now. Most people on average are getting maybe 3,000 steps a day, 3,000 steps a day, if any. I've had some clients who they didn't go out of the house and they got literally 145 steps that day. And you can imagine what that does to your body and your metabolism and your sleep when you're literally not moving around, right? So the critical thing is, I actually have this rule of thumb. It's Dr. Cam's walking for sleep rule of thumb is you want to basically walk 100 steps for every, I think, hour of sleep that you want to get, or maybe I should say 1,000 steps for every hour of sleep that you want to get. So if you're trying to get the recommended amount of 7 to 9 hours of sleep, you should be walking 7,000 to 9,000 steps per day. Because quite frankly, the best way to fall asleep and deal with stress, deal with anxiety is to do some physical activity and walk it out. So it's very, very underappreciated, but try it. It will work really well. And obviously if it's safe to do in your neighborhood, I'm more of a fan of trying to space out the walking all throughout the day. But if you haven't done it and you know you're going to bed in an hour or two, and like I said, it's safe to do so in your neighborhood, go for a power walk. It can be incredibly helpful. If you do kind of a 30-minute walk, you can put in a good 3,000 steps. If you're a fast walker, maybe even 5,000 steps and get the majority of that in. So that's particularly helpful. Other supplements that are very helpful for sleep and anxiety are magnesium, which is what the user sort of asked about. I think we've talked about magnesium on previous shows. It doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the types of magnesium, as long as it's a chelate, meaning that the magnesium is bound to some sort of amino acid. They have better bioavailability. So the super common and cheap one is magnesium glycinate. It's basically magnesium that's bound to the glycine molecule. Glycine is a very common amino acid that's found in if you're eating bone broth and things like that, very high in glycine. It contains collagen. It's good for your skin as well. So or it's a constituent of collagen. So magnesium is a great choice. I'm also a big fan of magnesium taurate, which is magnesium bound to taurine, which is another amino acid and neurotransmitter. That kind of kills two birds with one stone because taurine in and of itself is anxiolytic or reduces anxiety. So both the magnesium and the taurine are synergistic essentially to both reduce anxiety. And you can kind of kill two birds with one stone. The one thing that I would pay attention to, though, is making sure the amount of what's called elemental magnesium that you're getting. Because the thing is, in these chelates, it's only 9-10% magnesium, depending on which chelate it is. And the other 90-91% is the glycine or the taurine. And so, it's almost like it's the delivery vehicle for the compound. So the thing is, you want to try to get, depending on how much magnesium that you're trying to consume at a time, maybe 100, 200 milligrams at a time. You can probably take up to 400 milligrams a day is, I think, the recommended daily intake of magnesium. But that might mean, for instance, if you're taking magnesium taurinate, in order to get 400 milligrams of magnesium, you have to take about 4,000 milligrams of the combination. So just kind of pay attention to the dosages. Good brands will tell you how much real magnesium or elemental magnesium is in it. The bad brands don't really say it. They'll just be 1,000 milligrams. And you're that's not magnesium. It's the compound together. Another very helpful compound is L-theanine, which is an amino acid. It's a constituent in tea, which is why tea is less jittery than coffee. It helps kind of smooth out the effects of caffeine and kind of the peripheral stimulation that people get in terms of the jitteriness. So magnesium, L-theanine are very helpful. Phosphatidylserine is another kind of helpful supplement. It helps reduce cortisol. If you follow Dr. Peter Attia, he's a big fan of phosphatidylserine. Again, make sure you use a good brand. I like Tonic brand. And Jarrow makes a good version of phosphatidylserine. So those are all, helpful supplements, essentially, if you're dealing with a lot of stress or anxiety. Like I said, consult with your physician. This is not medical advice. Make sure it's safe for you to do so and it fits in with the rest of your medication regimens and it doesn't have any contraindications with whatever you're taking. So those are helpful sort of supplement tips. Now, the reason that you take melatonin, I actually think melatonin is heavily overused. People overuse it and they overdose it. And that's because most of the supplements include huge dosages. It's usually like 3 milligrams, which is about 10 times the amount that your body naturally makes. I actually recommend people take a tenth of the dose, which is 0.3 milligrams or what's called 300 micrograms. You can actually find brands like Life Extension if you go on Amazon that actually carry this lower dose. I'm more of a fan of taking the physiological dose, meaning the amount that your body naturally produces, because why overdose on melatonin? It's relatively safe, like it's not going to necessarily cause any complications, but taking 10 times the amount that your body makes, it just seems kind of unnecessary to me. We don't know what really the long-term ramifications are. And then the concern is that you may downregulate your endogenous production of it, meaning if you're taking 10 times the amount that your body makes, maybe your body's going to be like, I don't really need to make as much as my own. We know that's true for hormones in general, like testosterone. That's why when injecting testosterone shuts off your own production. Melatonin is actually also a hormone. And so I would say just be a little bit cautious about overdosing on it. Like I said, it's relatively safe, but don't take huge doses of it all the time. The second thing about melatonin is it's not that great for anxiety or sleep. Quite frankly, it's not going to do much at all for that reason, but it's great for shifting your circadian rhythm. So if you're jet lagged, you're switching time zones, or you're kind of like a late sleeper, you go to bed at 1 in the morning and you're trying to go to bed at like midnight, 11 o'clock, you're trying to get to sleep earlier and you have a hard time falling asleep because of that shift in your bedtime, then that's where melatonin is very magical and effective. Melatonin naturally endogenously gets produced when nightfall happens and you're getting ready to go to bed. And so by taking it a little bit earlier than your body's naturally used to producing it, it's kind of signaling to your body, okay, it's time to go to sleep. So 300 micrograms. I actually like taking an extended release form. Life Extension actually sells one that's kind of sustained release. So as opposed to getting absorbed really quickly, the half-life of melatonin is very short. It only lasts in your system about 30 minutes. If you take an extended or sustained release version, it will last for about 6 hours, which is a little bit more like the natural peak and trough that your body produces. So I actually only recommend using melatonin kind of as needed. Like when you're making these shifts or these transitions, it's very helpful to take, like I said, as a travel supplement, sleep lag supplement, trying to get to bed earlier supplement. But as a daily kind of use thing, I don't actually usually recommend it for that reason. Magnesium, on the other hand, is a naturally required element and mineral that you get from your food. Unfortunately, most people are magnesium deficient. And so taking a daily magnesium supplement is actually a pretty good idea for most people. Even if you're a really, really healthy eater, unless you're like meticulously tracking on chronometer, you're probably actually not getting enough magnesium, unless you absolutely know for sure. So it never really hurts to take it. Again, consult with your doctor. So you can see why it's important to understand what the kind of etiology or the root cause is of your sleep problems. If you have stress or anxiety, you may want to take different supplements, have different strategies, versus if you're having jet lag or circadian rhythm issues, you probably want to take maybe more of a melatonin or a different type of supplement. And the behavioral intervention is different too. So like for instance, if you are trying to go to bed earlier, you want to get very bright light in the morning. So that's what you want to do. You really want to avoid napping. If you're trying to shift your sleep schedule to sleep earlier, you want to make sure it's obviously very dark as much as possible. And you don't want to, ideally, you don't want to shift your sleep schedule too quickly, right? If you're going to bed at 1 and all of a sudden the next night you're trying to go to bed at 10, your body is going to, sometimes that works if you're very sleep deprived. But what happens oftentimes is your body will almost interpret it as not bedtime, but almost nap time. And so what will happen is you'll go to bed at 10, you'll wake up at 12 after like a 2-hour nap, and then you're wide awake and you can't go back to sleep. So the recommendation that I generally make to when I'm working with clients is try to only shift your sleep schedule back 30 minutes, maybe 60 minutes at most at a time. So, right, so if you're going to bed at 1, the next night, 12:30, 12, 11:30, 11, 10:30, 10. So by the end of the week, over 6 days, you've cut down on that 3 hours that you're sleeping too late. And so it's much better to do it gradually because the chance of you running into insomnia issues is much lower. And quite frankly, like have a little patience, like doing it over 6 days, you're not going to miss out on too much sleep. And in fact, long-term, you're probably going to sleep better. So you got to kind of take it easy with your rhythm. You got to take it easy with your body. It doesn't like huge shifts. It's much better to be sort of gradual about it. Other helpful sleep tips. You want to maintain, this is just for general, an optimal sleeping temperature. Unfortunately, and I've talked about this publicly, this whole notion that you should be sleeping in a room that's 60 to 67 degrees is bullshit. Because I've actually reviewed the research literature, and the thing is, it really depends on how much clothes you're wearing. It depends on how hot your body runs. Some people naturally have a slightly lower or higher body temperature depending on their metabolism, their body fat, etc., and how thick your sheets are. How much humidity there is in the room, how much wind there is in the room. And because there's all these variables, you cannot say there's an optimal sleeping temperature for everyone. There's not. Your room should be as dark as possible. I'm actually not a fan of blinds because blinds always leak no matter what kind of great blinds you had. I think I had double blinds installed in my previous place. They still leak light because they can't sort of touch the window and there's cracks in between them anyway. So the best thing to do is get either blackout shades or, quite frankly, old school curtains, because you can, just like hotel rooms, if you're familiar, you ever go to Vegas, they do a better job of sort of blocking the light if they're heavy curtains. If you can't get those installed, although I think it's a great long-term investment if you own your place or you're staying in a place more than a year, it's actually worth it in terms of there's nothing better to invest in than your health. I do recommend sleeping with a sleeping mask. The problem is that sleeping masks also leak, especially if you have a little bit more of a prominent nose. There's no good sleeping mask, quite frankly, that I found. But there is one that I recommend. It's by Alaska Bear. You can find it in my Twitter sleep optimization thread. We'll post in the show notes afterwards. The clever thing about that mask, and it's pretty cheap, I think it's like 10, 12 bucks, is most masks have just one strap that goes behind your ear. This actually has two straps. And so it can actually like bolt down the bottom of the sleeping mask in addition to the top. So the top one keeps it flush against your forehead. The bottom one keeps it flush against your nose. And so it's less likely to move around and less likely to leak light. It's still not perfect, but I think it's the best one that I found. And so I highly recommend that. This one may seem obvious, but alcohol and caffeine clearly interfere with sleep quality. So the thing, though, that maybe most people don't know is I actually recommend people don't drink caffeine or alcohol, not just within 4 hours of bed, but maybe up to 12 hours. So I really actually encourage people to not drink caffeine or alcohol in the afternoon. Obviously, socially, the drinking, that's a different issue, but caffeine use, if you're consuming coffee or tea, better to keep it in the mornings and not too much in the afternoons. The best thing to do if you're not sleeping well is to have, in addition to the walking that I mentioned, in terms of walking 1,000 steps per hour or 7,000 to 9,000 steps for 7 to 9 hours of sleep, is to have a strict bedtime routine. So the idea is to have do the same exact routine 5 to 30 minutes before you go to bed every single night. I always say it should feel like a goddamn ritual. So that's wash up, meditate, write a gratitude journal, snuggle with your partner, do whatever it is that you like to do before bed, but do it at the same time, in the same way every single night. Maybe if it's with your partner, you need a little variety, but other than that, it should be the exact same thing. The other thing that I always tell people is basically the most underestimated thing is just sleeping more. People underestimate the amount of sleep that they need. People think they get away with sleeping less than 7 hours. I don't think with rare exception of some people who are genetic freaks, basically almost everyone needs more than 7 hours of sleep, in my opinion. People who get less than 7 hours and they're waking up early either have sleeping issues, quite frankly, or they're using caffeine as a way of artificially, staying awake despite their chronic sleep deprivation. 7 to 8 hours is minimum. 8 to 10 hours, I would actually argue, if you're doing really heavy physical or mental activity, professional athletes try to sleep closer to 9 to 10 hours a night. So if you're doing really, really heavy labor, a lot of physical activity, working out, you may want to try to sleep more. And a lot of people, though, in response to that say, well, it's hard to sleep in. And you're right, it is hard to sleep in, particularly when you're waking up past sunrise and it is bright and you haven't done the blackout shades or the sleeping mask that I mentioned. So the thing is, you got to go to bed earlier, right? The earlier that you go to bed, the higher the likelihood that you're able to sleep in more. And so there's this old wives' tale of like an hour of sleep before midnight is worth twice as much as the sleep after midnight. I don't think that's literally true, but there is a hint of truth to that, in the sense that if you're going to bed before midnight, you're more likely to sleep more. It's not that the quality is better. And so as a result of that, overall your sleep is going to be better, your health is going to be better. So the thing I also tell people, it's better to have a bedtime alarm and never actually use a wake up time alarm, because my philosophy is if you're using an alarm to wake up, you are by definition sleep deprived. You should not be using a wake up alarm at all. You should only use it as a backup to make sure that you're not going to like randomly oversleep one day and then miss a meeting essentially. But other than that, you're basically, if an alarm is waking you up and interrupting your sleep in order to jolt you out of bed, you are depriving yourself of sleep, because your body's saying, I want more. And you're saying, no, I'm not letting you sleep in, right? It's essentially kind of a form of self-punishment. It's masochistic in my opinion. Go to bed earlier, fix your sleep issues so that you're naturally waking up at the time that you need to, and you have enough time to take care of your kids, go to work, do whatever it is that you need to do, work out, etc. So now let's get to the morning. First thing that you do when you wake up, get out of bed immediately. We talked about in previous shows this concept of sleep efficiency. Sleep efficiency is the percentage of time that you actually sleep in bed. You should ideally have a sleep efficiency of 90, maybe even 95% if you're perfectly healthy. So that basically means is when you're in bed, you should be asleep, knocked out. So the part of the way of getting really good sleep efficiency is you want to be able to get to a point where you're falling asleep within 5 to maybe 20 minutes when you try to go to bed. It shouldn't be effortful. You should have done your routine. You're going to bed at the same time. You've done your walking. You've done all the other factors to help you go to bed quickly. So that's your sleep latency. And the other part of it is in the morning, you want to get out of bed immediately. Don't snooze. Snoozing is the worst possible thing in the world next to a bedtime alarm. It's actually worse than a wake up alarm, because you are kind of falling back asleep and you're not getting restful sleep. It's honestly better to just sleep in for 30 minutes and force yourself to get out of bed than snooze for 30 minutes and half-ass it. So don't do that to yourself. Get out of bed and ideally get some sunlight on your face. If you have a window, if you can get outside if possible, that helps reset your circadian rhythm and makes it much more likely that you're going to be able to go to sleep efficiently that night. So I think that's really helpful. Other sleep tips, sex or masturbation, people don't talk about it, but quite frankly, if you do it in a healthier and non-compulsive way, is a good de-stressor, and it does release oxytocin, which is kind of the love or cuddle hormone in your brain. In guys, it also releases prolactin, and that kind of hormone promotes sleep onset. So use it responsibly. Don't engage in pornography in bed. Don't have a bunch of random hookups who are staying over and mess up your sleep quality. So as long as you use that responsibly, it does work. Orgasm, it helps people fall asleep. And then finally, long-term fixes. If you're overweight, or particularly if you're obese, or you have been told that you snore, and if you don't know if you snore because you don't have a partner, record yourself with an app. There's a bunch of apps out there like Snore Lab that can do that. You may have some issues with sleep apnea. It's very common amongst people who are obese. So fixing that will actually be the biggest bang for your buck sleep intervention that you can do. It's actually more important than all the other tips that I mentioned previously. It'll literally save your life long term, because if you have obstructive sleep apnea, you are desaturating your oxygen levels, they're dropping. It really interferes with your sleep quality, and it's associated with all kinds of negative cardiovascular outcomes and mortality. Literally, you die sooner. So you definitely want to get that taken care of. There's a lot of guys though who aren't particularly obese. They may not meet the full clinical criteria for obstructive sleep apnea, but they still snore because of the physiology of their tongue and their mouth. And they may desaturate and wake up very briefly multiple times a night, even if they're not doing it for long periods of time. There's really great solutions. There's oral appliances that basically shift your jaw a little bit forward. It basically prevents your tongue from falling back into your mouth, and actually cuts down on your snoring. And so even if you're not treating your sleep apnea, you can at least address the snoring. There's a lot of great dentists and orthodontists who will make that custom appliance for you, and obviously decide in their opinion whether you need it or not, because I'm not providing medical advice. So a lot of people ask about sleep trackers. Here's the thing, they're not necessary. You can just use Apple's Health app. There's a lot of passive sleep trackers that just basically based on the last time you touch your phone and the first time you touch your phone in the morning, it extrapolates essentially how much sleep that you're getting. Or you can just look at the time when you go to bed and wake up and basically figure out how much you're sleeping. There obviously are fancier devices. A lot of people are a fan of the Oura Ring. You can obviously use a wearable watch like the Apple Watch or BioStrap. Amazon has one as well. Or there's some really fancy solutions like the 8 Sleep mattress that will cool your bed and track your sleep. I think it can be great if you're trying to optimize. I don't think it's particularly necessary for a ton of folks, but if it's helpful for you to look at that data and do that, then by all means go ahead and do that. Just watch out for long-term sleep debt. People, when they're chronically sleep deprived, basically accumulate what's called sleep debt. So if you miss out on sleep like an hour a night over the course of a week, you've accumulated like 7 hours of sleep debt, and that can really just impair your cognitive functioning, your mood, your productivity, all that kind of stuff. So it's really, really important to fix your sleep issues, and because it's very hard to make up sleep debt. You can try to make it up. Obviously, a lot of younger people sleep in on the weekends. That's why teenagers love to sleep until noon. Most people, when they become adults, especially as they move into their 30s, lose the ability to do that over time. And so one way of alleviating that is through naps. So taking like a 20 to 45 minute nap. If you do it early enough in the afternoon, you don't want to nap too late because it'll interfere with your ability to go to bed. The magical time is about basically 7 hours after you wake up is the optimal nap time. So if you think about it, if you're waking up at 7 in the morning, that's about 2 p.m., which coincidentally coincides with a lot of cultures' siesta times. So it's probably not a coincidence. It's kind of a traditional kind of thing. But yeah, taking a short nap. You don't want to take too long of naps because then you'll fall into deep sleep and it changes your circadian rhythm and makes it hard to fall asleep. So 20 to 45 minutes seem to be just right. So that's all of my sleep optimization tips in a huge like 20, 30 minute segment. We'll probably chop it up, post it up on YouTube and Twitter for later consumption. All right, I see a question that says, isn't it beneficial to wake up at the same time every day as well as to get into a sleep routine? And the answer to that question is yes, it is ideal if you wake up at the same time. It just helps kind of set your circadian rhythm and get used to it. It also just helps set your productivity for the day. The exception to that, though, is exactly what I said, which is if you have a little bit of sleep debt, like you've missed out on whatever 30, 60 minutes of sleep a night. If you have the desire and the ability to sleep in on the weekend, it's better to make up that sleep debt than to be really fastidious about, oh my God, I need to wake up at the same exact time because I read somewhere that it's optimal. You should listen to your body to some degree. And so if your body's asking you to sleep in more, that means you should try to sleep in more. The thing is, though, the optimal long-term solution is to try to go to bed earlier so that you don't need to sleep in past your wake up time. But yeah, if you have the opportunity, it doesn't get you in trouble with work and you can do it on a weekend or whatever, then it's useful to be flexible about wake up times.
I have a question about you talked about the Apple Watch. Do you find it useful or not? Because I have one and I don't usually use them, and I think it's a waste of money. So what do you think about that?
I think every tool is as useful as the way that you use it. Like I said, is it necessary? No. And the particular issue with Apple Watch is you got to charge it. So a lot of people don't sleep with it overnight because that's typically when they're charging their watch. Obviously you can do it during the day so that it has enough juice, but it basically needs to be fully charged before you go to bed in order to, track your sleep. So that's a little bit of the trickiness of it. That's why some of the lower power sleep trackers like Amazon Halo that do not have a screen, or BioStrap, which do not have a screen. I think Whoop doesn't have a screen either. They can hold their battery charged much longer and they don't run into the same issue that Apple Watch does. Maybe the technology will get better and better over time so that it's not an issue, but it kind of is an issue now. So unless you're very responsible about charging your Apple Watch before you go to bed, it's not a great sleep tracker for that reason. Like if you're using the tracking in order to change your behavior, then I would say it's useful. I always say data without behavior change or insight without behavior change is basically useless. So if you're just collecting this information and you're not acting on it in any way, you do not need to be tracking your sleep. In fact, in sort of psychological psychotherapy practice, we're generally only self-monitoring or what's called tracking for short periods of time while people are actively trying to make changes. So for instance, if you came in and said, I'm getting 6 hours of sleep, I do not feel well rested and productive, I would like to increase it to 7 to 9 hours. I'd be like, great, let's track your sleep for how long we're working on that, right? So maybe after 2, 3, 4 weeks, We fixed your sleep issue through going through all of the optimization techniques. At that point, I would say now you're getting 8 hours of sleep a night. You're doing it consistently. You're not having any problems. You don't really need to track anymore at that point. It's useful when you're actively trying to change or improve upon something that you need to track. So I use tracking a little bit more as needed, as opposed to something that you meticulously need to do every single day. Because unless you're looking at it and doing something differently, it's just kind of a vanity metric.
Yeah. So I'm a student, and I'm graduating soon.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm graduating, I'm working late nights, and I try to sleep early. Like I set a schedule, like at midnight I should fall asleep, but it never happens. I always fall asleep at 2, 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I tried I saw so many YouTube videos. You have to breathe correctly. You have to lay a certain position. So I tried it all. And still, it's been like, since this year started,
Yeah.
that I can't sleep that well.
So you're saying you're trying to go to bed at midnight, but you're not falling asleep till 2, 3 in the morning. So are you just tossing and turning for 2 to 3 hours basically in bed?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Well, I can't diagnose you over Clubhouse, but it's highly likely that you probably have like insomnia at that point. You know, a lot of the sleep hacks and optimization tips that I'm sharing are for sort of a non-clinical, audience. But once it's kind of getting that bad, I would actually highly suggest that you talk to a doctor about it or see a psychologist. The best treatment for insomnia is something called CBTI, or it's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It's an evidence-based technique. It has actually one of the best essentially effect sizes in all of behavioral treatments. It works really well. Basically, that's the summary. There's a lot more nuanced behavioral techniques that are in CBTI, which we probably don't have time to go into for this show. But one very quick tip, and this is like a tenth of what's in CBTI, is you don't want to be tossing and turning in bed for 2 to 3 hours. So if you are going to bed at midnight and you're not falling asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, get out of bed. Go sit in a chair in your room, or ideally even leave the room. Go sit in your living room if you have a living room, and do something else. Don't go on your phone. Don't watch television. Don't go on your laptop. You don't want the bright light shining in your eyes. You want to read or do something calming, and don't go back to bed until you're tired. So if that's 30 minutes, if it's an hour, that's fine. You'd be tossing and turning in bed anyway, but it's better to be sitting on a couch and not associate the bed with the stress and anxiety of not being able to fall asleep than doing what you're doing now. The reason is, as we talked about earlier, is you want high sleep efficiency, right? And if you're not asleep while in bed, you're ruining your sleep efficiency, because if you're going to bed at 2, 3 in the morning, let's say you're waking up at 8 and you only got 5 hours of sleep, even though you're in bed for 8 hours, then your sleep deficiency is 5 divided by 8, or 62.5%. That's way below what it should be in terms of the 90+%. So that's a very helpful, one of the helpful techniques in CBTI. It's kind of like stimulus control and sleep hygiene. But I would look up CBTI online. There are some companies that are doing digital versions of it. One's called Sleepio, Sleep.io. It's part of a company called Big Health. They have sort of like an automated computerized version of it. There's a couple other versions of it out there too. But I would say, at this point, you probably have, like I said, not diagnosing insomnia, and it may require a more active treatment than just some of these like sleep tips or supplements that we're talking about here.
Because something I noticed is during the day, I always take a nap for 3-4 hours. It's since it happened that I can't sleep at night, during the day, whenever I take a nap, it's always 3-4 hours.
Yeah, well, it's a huge part of the problem then, right? So now you see why you're having trouble falling asleep for 2 to 3 hours, because you're napping for 3 to 4 hours. That's not a nap. You're actually like breaking up your sleep into 2 different chunks. So the thing is, I know that makes you feel better in the short term, but it's actually perpetuating the problem in the long term. So if I was working with a client that had a similar kind of problem, I would wean you off of the naps. Like I said in the earlier part of the segment, 20 to 45 minutes is the maximum amount that you can nap without significantly interfering with your ability to fall asleep that night. So it's going to suck in the short term. You're going to feel tired because you're not getting the amount of sleep that you want, but it's going to help you fall asleep better in the long term. So you kind of have to bite the bullet a little bit and not take these super long naps. It's not even a nap. It's a midday sleep. You gotta cut out the midday sleeping because it's going to help your ability to fall asleep better. I would, in fact, if I had to bet, would say if you cut out the napping during the day and you worked out every day, because it sounds like it's something that helps you sleep better, those two things alone would probably highly likely fix your sleep issue, which sounds like insomnia. Here's the thing. Unless you have true narcolepsy and you cannot control falling asleep, that's a different issue. And there's some treatments for that. I think you're just chronically sleep deprived and you fall into this habit of sleeping during the day. You got to just catch yourself in terms of doing it. Don't allow yourself to fall asleep, especially for 3-4 hours. You're not doing that in class. You're doing that at home. Like I said, set an alarm if you're tired, 20 to 45 minutes. Force yourself to get up, and you're going to feel better long term. So you can help it. The thing is, you're not in the habit of controlling it, and you've gotten kind of used to giving into it. But like I said, it's going to suck for a couple of days. You're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel groggy. If you fight through the fatigue, you're going to fall asleep better at night, and you'll fix this issue long term. But you can't keep doing what you're doing because you're just going to get the same results.
Okay, doctor. I will definitely take your advice.
Sounds good. Come back on a future show and let me know how it goes.
All right, so this question actually came from Discord. I'd like to ask if it's possible for a man, especially a younger man in his late 20s, early 30s, if it's possible to shed the nice guy personality and what he should do to become someone worthy of respect and deference after a lifetime of not putting themselves first and being afraid of speaking up because others might see him as rude or entitled.
Yeah, this is a great question about sort of how do you overcome the nice guy personality. So I think the first thing that I recommend is if you suspect that you're a nice guy, and I don't mean that literally. Obviously, it's a good thing to be nice or kind, but let's be strict about what we mean by a nice guy in quotations. A nice guy is not someone who's nice or kind per se. It's someone in an almost sort of subconsciously manipulative way is thinking that if they act in a certain way that's like deferential or subservient, then they can get what they want out of typically a woman if they're a heterosexual male, right? And so in some ways, it's actually not a nice strategy. It's kind of a manipulative strategy because someone essentially thinks they have in low enough self-esteem that they are not bringing enough to the table, right? Because if you're a high value man, if you have high self-worth, then you realize that you are someone of value and that you can contribute value to a relationship. You don't need to buy someone's affection, right? Or bribe them or entice them with things or experiences, right? But if you're kind of a nice guy, you think, oh, well, if I just do these nice things, if I take her out to these extravagant dinner dates, if I sit there and listen to her complain about all the guys who are assholes and don't treat her well, then she'll like me. And the sad reality of that strategy is it doesn't really work very well. And so I think part of owning up to sort of the nice guy issue is to realize the underlying psychological purpose behind it, which is it's really a coping mechanism for low self-worth, low self-esteem. And it's a compensatory behavioral strategy to think that if I'm not worth it as a man, that I need to essentially like purchase love or behave in a way where I am essentially purchasing it through my effort, right? I need to labor for love. And that's really sad. Yeah, I don't think people look, relationships or work is certainly, you got to do things and treat the other person nicely, clearly. But if you're going over the top, I think women can sniff that out. They actually have very good instincts in terms of like, why is he treating me so nice, right? I have lots of stories about this. With my female friends, I'll talk about guys showing up with bouquet of 24 roses on a first date, which in another context, like we're dating and it's Valentine's Day, would be a very affectionate kind of thing, but it's too much too soon. And the guy is just trying too hard. And it was actually a huge turn off for her. So that's a great example of going too far. There's a great book on this by a colleague of mine. I believe his name is Dr. Robert Glover, if I got his name right. It's literally called No More Mr. Nice Guy. I highly recommend it for people who, if you're identifying that in yourself, then he has a lot of great strategies for overcoming it, which go far beyond the purposes of this podcast. At some point, actually, I should probably invite him to the podcast so he can talk all about it. But I highly recommend it. It's kind of the manual for it, and it's a great strategy. By the way, that question had a couple words at the end, and he said he was concerned about coming off as rude. Was that the question?
Different after a lifetime of not putting themselves first and being afraid of speaking up because others might see him as rude or entitled.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting thing, right? So your understanding is part of the psychology of this person's question, right? They're saying, well, if I didn't act this way, other people would perceive that I'm rude or entitled. So, in a kind of a cognitive therapy frame, you'd ask the person, well, what's the evidence for that, right? Like if you just act normally without kind of getting into this excessive nicety, have people ever accused you of being rude or entitled? Has that happened consistently over time from different people? Probably not. A lot of the kind of social anxiety that people have is that they're concerned about the judgment of other people, right? That they're going to be perceived as weird, basically. When most of the time people are not thinking about you as much as you are thinking about yourself. So the moment that we realize that, we kind of reduce a little bit some of our concerns about judgment that you have. So I would actually work through with that person, and maybe you can work through with yourself, the person who asked that question, and just saying, is this really true? Like, do people constantly think that you're rude or entitled? And I bet, by the way, if they do, in the rare instances they do, it has nothing to do with you being nice. Acting nice or subservient or over the top does not come off as rude or entitled. Or if you don't, it just comes off as neutral, right? If you're just like doing nothing and you're just standing there and you're not doing much, people aren't going to think you're rude or entitled. I don't know, you're kind of like a blob. People come off as rude or entitled when they act in a way that's arrogant or smug, which ironically is also essentially a defense against low self-worth or low insecurity. People who come off as narcissistic are essentially compensating for low self-worth. And one way of compensating with it, like some people go down the nice guy route, and it's very kind of beta male behavior. Other guys kind of go this sort of narcissistic route where they come off as cocky, right? Ironically, it's the same root cause of low self-esteem. The sad thing is that the cocky narcissists actually do better with women, at least until women kind of wake up to that strategy, but at least short term, it works better. I don't obviously recommend that for a long-term dating strategy, but women are attracted to confidence. And so while it's a better strategy, it does come off as rude or entitled. So the answer is to be neither a nice guy nor a rude, arrogant, narcissistic prick. The reality is you have to look, I hate to use the word be yourself, but you need to be your authentic self, right? Reduce some of the concerns or these thoughts, diffuse from some of these thoughts that people are going to judge you or evaluate you as being rude or entitled. They probably will not. And at the same time, you need to change some of your inner beliefs and saying, look, I'm a man of worth, or at least working. Well, you always are a man of work, but you're working towards being even more effective, more productive, more successful, etc. And these are natural traits that will attract people to me. And I don't need to act in a nice guy, quote unquote, subservient manner in order to attract people. I'm not going to win them over with effort. I'm going to win them over because I'm a person of worth, and hopefully they'll be attracted to that. And if they're not the right person for you, right? Guys have this typical fantasy of pining or idealizing over someone. They'll find someone on TikTok or some YouTube or Instagram influencer and be like, oh, this woman is perfect. If only she would respond to my DMs and I would love her. And you're like, yeah, maybe you're physically attracted to her, but you can't love someone that you have no actual connection, meaningful connection to. And second, if she doesn't like you, you're almost, it's an avoidance of reality. You're saying, if this person was someone other than who they are, right? For someone who fundamentally is not attracted to, let's say, your type for whatever reason that is, She likes guys that are, I don't know, 6'4" and purple, and then you're just not that thing. You're saying, okay, I wish she was literally different. So you're basically having this totally irrational belief that I wish that this person looked exactly the same, but they had almost like a personality or brain transplant and liked other people so that they can magically love me. So I'm like, you're not in love with that person. You're in love with an idealized image of someone who's not a real human being, right? Because you can't pick and choose essentially parts of people and amalgamate them together into some fantasy, right? So the conclusion from all that, though, is when someone rejects you or someone's not into you, then you should celebrate that. And you'd be like, you know what? That person was not a match for me. Now, if they did that for genuine reasons, if you treated them poorly and that's the reason they rejected you, you need to fix that and go to therapy. But if it's just because you're not their type, then, take the L, so to speak. Find someone who is really into you. And I guarantee you there's, 7 billion people in the world. There's someone out there for you. You just got to find them.
We had a comment on YouTube. All those girls are posing anyway.
That's true. Well, I question actually the pursuit of influencers. Funnily, I was talking to an influencer, Ty Lopez, about this because he's also really into personality testing, and he said he's tested a lot of Instagram influencers, and they come off very high in narcissism. And pursuing a relationship with someone who is highly narcissistic does not typically bode well if you want to stay together long term. So yeah, don't marry a narcissist if you can avoid it. A lot of great questions for today. Thank you for everyone who joined us on Instagram, on Twitter Live. Thanks for everyone who joined us on Clubhouse as well, from all over the world. And thanks everyone on Discord and YouTube. And I'll catch you all next Thursday, 6 o'clock Pacific time. And yeah, if I didn't get to your questions today, my apologies. We try to run through this as quickly as possible. Submit them on the Discord channel, or email me, cam@maximistribe.com, and we'll queue it up for next week. All right, take care, everyone. Be happy, healthy, safe, and treat your loved ones well. And don't be a nice guy.